So, as some of you know, about actually a little over a year ago, I formally converted to Eastern Orthodoxy from Eastern Catholicism, and I've been meaning for a while to put together just a video, kind of giving my reasons for why that all happened. Not necessarily for apologetic reasons, but just kind of people have asked me for, the last year of what went down and why I made the decisions that I did. And just recently on social media, it's come up again to where I think it's important now that it's been a year and kind of the dust has settled, that I can give a more detailed explanation for my actions and also to dispel a lot of just maybe representations of what happened and why I did what I did. So I just want to do that now, and sorry about the low quality of the video. I've been putting this video off, and I was planning to do something a little more formal, but I'm just popping on to my computer and just going for it. I'm not doing the whole video setup. But I guess the elephant in the room, or what a lot of people interpret my actions, resulting from, is basically a stalled out vocation, and that's actually not what happened. So yes, I was, finishing up credits for making up the difference between my theology degree and an MDiv at the Byzantine Seminary, and very, very active in parish life, but things basically were not moving forward with my former bishop. Um, but just to make it clear, like my former bishop had already announced his retirement. Everyone knew that he wasn't going to be the bishop for very much longer. People who were mentoring me vocationally, they already knew who the next bishop would be, which turned out, to be the next bishop of my former eparchy. And he was quote unquote our guy. He was someone who would be much more friendly to someone who's more conservative, more traditional. Um, and it was made very clear to me that once that bishop became the official bishop, things had paused because of COVID. But once that all went through, that my vocational situation would change. So I was fairly confident that that was correct. So I didn't become Orthodox because my vocation stalled out. Like it was actually, a visualizable future. I only needed a handful of classes before I had the academics finished up. So I mean that really didn't um, that wasn't the direct cause. It actually was, though, however, an indirect cause. So notice that I said, my vocational mentors were describing the up and coming bishop as our guy. Um, that's sort of the problem. Okay, so my experience in Eastern Catholicism, it was basically a decade of really, really bad clergy, just really bad clergy. Um, but I'm not making the argument that because there were bad clergy in the Eastern Catholic Church or the Catholic Church in general, that disvalidates the claims of the church. That's not my argument. That's not what I'm saying. I also have met some of the best clergy I've ever experienced, just like quality human beings in Eastern Catholicism, many of whom were certainly mentors, pastors, friends, who I would still consider friends, not pastors, pastoral mentors anymore, but people who I would want to maintain relationships with. But obviously, now that we're not in the same sort of ecclesiastic space, I don't know if maintaining those relationships is all that tenable. Um, but I'm not making the claim that I left because there was really bad clergy, because there were also really good clergy. But what I came to in my experience of Eastern Catholicism is that I believe that because of how that church is structured, it makes bad clergy a systemic problem. There's really no way to get around it. when you're a small church that is connected to a larger ecclesial body that you're absolutely dependent on financially, and just in so many ways, you're going to get basically the leftovers of Roman Catholicism when it comes to clergy, and that's really what I saw. Like people who couldn't cut it, couldn't make it in Roman Catholicism, basically trickled down our way, and it was this, constant process of filling in gaps, filling in holes, but not really investing in younger guys to bring them up through the clerical ranks because they're all scary conservative traditionalists. Um, so the same problem that the Catholic Church is having, on a larger scale of sort of this inner civil war between tradition and the progressive kind of wing, I saw that as having a direct influence on Eastern Catholicism, even though it's less apparent because there is still that maintenance of at least the exteriors of Orthodoxy. The liturgy. I've seen very little in the way of bad liturgy in Eastern Catholicism. Most of that kind of stuff was the product of the 60s and 70s. But in Eastern Catholicism, it's still very much affected by the current war of the Catholic hierarchy is waging on its own faithful, which is just despicable. Um, so I think the bad clergy that I have experienced in Eastern Catholicism kind of are a byproduct of that similar tension. But also, I found the good clergy problematic as well because the vast majority of the fantastic Eastern Catholic priests and deacons and monks, um, one thing that they all had in common is they either one would privately admit to you that they do not believe the papal claims, um, or they were resigned to keep all of these doctrinal issues sort of ambiguous, like questions that we don't really need to engage ourselves in. We just need to focus on our tradition, focus on our communities, and fostering up who we are and what we have, and not focus on questions of how do we actually fit into this larger ecclesial structure, with the claims that the Roman Church has made about its own immediate jurisdiction and doctrinal infallibility. Um, so I also find that to be problematic. So if the best aspects of Eastern Catholicism, in my experience, were those that were the most orthodox, and that had to turn down our relationship with Rome, then basically it opened me to questioning, well, why do we have to maintain these relationships in the first place? Um, and I was totally on board with sort of the Zogby, Tawil kind of approach, at least in the Melkite Church, that would see ourselves as Orthodoxy in Catholic communion, standing up for Orthodox doctrine, ecclesiology, very skeptical, if not completely rejecting Vatican I. Those are all theological positions you can find in Eastern Catholicism, and most of the positive things that I've seen in Eastern Catholicism, it was in those sort of what I call the Tawil bubble. Like anyone who's sort of a spiritual child of Zogby or Tawil or that whole Cairo school, basically was where the health was in Eastern Catholicism. And that's really sort of in the Melkite world, maybe a similar trajectory in the Slavic Eastern Catholic churches would be the Sheptitsky kind of wing of particularly the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Very much similar, very much into recovering the fullness of Orthodox patrimony, but trying to navigate this union. So I really did try and went full on in that direction. Particularly on social media, but also I did 2 theological degrees at a Roman Catholic university, and the whole time I had to fight tooth and nail to kind of create this position, this space for an Eastern theological perspective. So this wasn't a project that I that was just a tendential kind of thing. I was not content to leave these questions vague, So I did go 100% in trying to nail out or hammer out a space for what I would have considered as authentic Catholicity. How do we have sort of Eastern theology a legitimate part of what the Catholic Church can maintain as a universal patrimony? Um, so I mean, this project was really central to what I saw as my vocation. So, as one of my Eastern Catholic mentors would always comment on, is that you have to have the vocation within the vocation. It's not just a matter of becoming a cleric. It's, and not to say that serving as a priest or a deacon is not a calling in and of itself, but oftentimes you have to have something that's below that, that is motivating that. And I really saw my theological work as what my vocation within my vocation was. So I went full bore. And subsequently, I've taken all of the articles and posts and things, or at least have tried to, down. But I'm not going to really give evidence, but I was highly invested, as I said, in this project, which meant a few things. One, I could not bring myself to do what these good Eastern Catholic clergy were modeling and advised me to do, and just leave these issues in the vague ether. Um, I couldn't bring myself to do that. I had to investigate them and actually try to map out on paper whether this system works or whether it doesn't. And towards the end of that theological enterprise, I kept coming to the problem that in order to make that work, in order to make that position a tenable space, I had to basically side with theologians or approaches that I considered sort of the ultra liberal positions. Uh, to really get around the papal claims, you have to go to Hans Kung, you have to go to Dvornik, you have to go. I mean, maybe you can use some de Lubac to get you there, but basically you have to go 100% with Jesuit Jesuit theology, and or at least that's the only way I could get there, is in order to sidestep the really hard stances of Vatican I, you had to go with very liberal theology. And to me, that was an eternal internal contradiction that I couldn't maintain. I couldn't at one point be a traditionalist, highly invested in the Eastern tradition, its theology, its liturgy, its spirituality, and not just all of those as an integral whole. Like that is what the sacred tradition is. But at the same time, to make a place for that in a larger sort of Catholic context, side with theologians who are constantly trying to undermine that. Um, so I became convinced, actually, not necessarily at first by Eastern or by Orthodox apologists, but by traditionalist Roman Catholic apologists, that the Catholic Church's hard stances in Vatican I or Trent were really incompatible with the new theology that came out of the 20th century. So it was really that position that I was trying to maintain. In my spirit, I couldn't really caucus with the liberals, because at the end of the day, I'm by instinct a traditionalist. But I had to, in order to make the Eastern Catholicism work, and that just gave me such spiritual pause, but also like existential. That was an existential crisis, really. That this really wasn't working. That to protect the very thing that I sought to protect, I had to embrace a theology that ultimately would undermine it. I couldn't square that circle, basically. And another aspect that sort of is tendential to this as well is because I was so focused on our Orthodox patrimony, and in particular that it's not just liturgy, that it's theology, that it's spirituality, that they all integrate and or basically form a complete um, matrix of experience. That's what I was giving people as, at least a former catechist, just as a cantor, iconographer, just someone who is involved in church. That's what I was constantly giving people, or pointing people towards. And I had to reconcile with the fact that so often people who were influenced by me, or people who I had developed relationships with and had, brought or helped to bring into the faith, um, almost without exception, all of them had become Orthodox, and I was still the holdout trying to make this Eastern Catholicism work, where really what I valued, what I was pushing, what I was trying to bring to the world was just simply Orthodoxy without this elaborate sort of ecclesiology stapled onto it. And that also gave me a lot of spiritual spiritual pause and existential angst, that I was really devoting myself to orthodoxy, but I wasn't myself Orthodox. And I know that was the claim, that I was Orthodox, but Orthodox in Catholic communion. But like I said, theologically, I couldn't square that circle. I couldn't make the theology coherent without becoming an ultra liberal. And even though there is this wing within Eastern Catholicism of people who are very Orthodox, um, you know, even my experience of liturgy, like the best Antiochian liturgy is in the Melkite Church. And I don't mean like some crazy sort of, churches that have been taken over by Maronites or something, where they have like creepy, guitar music. That's not what I'm talking about. Like I was steeped and around people who were steeped in the liturgical tradition. And so I've actually found, like, a lot of people who I experienced in Eastern Catholicism were more Orthodox than the Orthodox. But at the end of the day, I couldn't make the claim that I was fully Orthodox because I couldn't make the theology square on paper. And in order to get people to buy into my orthodoxy, I had to basically give a very elaborate apology for how you have to also accept this elaborate ecclesiology. And it really wasn't working. And what really came to a head is at the parish that we were at. I had really exhausted myself um, in trying to make that parish um, survivable. So basically, what happened is we had moved, from the West Coast to the East Coast, and as soon as we moved to the parish we're at, um, for one, there was a very problematic priest who was there, who basically, what I was explaining, like the Eastern Catholic churches often get sort of the bottom of the barrel. This guy, I don't even want to get into the personals of it, but basically he had come in from the Anglican tradition, gotten rejected by the Roman Catholics, and got picked up by us. And it had split the parish. There was all kinds of funny business going on. So it was a bad situation, but I kind of prepared myself for, like, okay, this is a bad situation, but we can no longer really afford to live on the West Coast. We need to relocate to the South. So I was just going to have to bear it. Well, as soon as we moved there, he actually died after complications with the surgery. And the parish was basically pastorless for a good 6 months. And in that 6 months, basically, I had to keep the thing from closing down. Um, Everything from the landscaping to working with other clergy in the eparchy to kind of pay the bills and fix the property, because the property was in a really bad, uh, really poor state. So I had invested so much time and money and energy into this, and really amazing relationships came out of that. But then again, all of those relationships, because I had invested in them so much, they, like, really close friends of ours, became Orthodox, and it just caused in me sort of this crisis of, when when I knew I was on a vocational trajectory that was going to materialize at some point, yet then again, I didn't actually believe in the ecclesiology that my church represented. And I, as what I hopefully am, as an honest sort of academic, couldn't just leave these questions vague. Um, and also, I just saw the really the systemic problems with making a go of Eastern Catholicism, of putting in all this work to get people exposed to Orthodoxy, and then it pay off, like their lives get better. They it clicks, and they go, "Wow, this is a real treasure," and then they leave. Um, I basically decided that I could no longer devote my life, devote my energies to a project that I one didn't believe in, and two I didn't believe really had a future. And that's what happened. Did it have to do with vocation? Yes. Did it have to do with theology? Yes. Did it have to do with my allowing myself to really take seriously Eastern Orthodox apologetics? Yeah, because I really wanted answers to these questions. Um, so people like Jay Dyer and Ubi Petras, online personalities were actually really pivotal because they basically deconstructed that position that I was trying to lay out. And I really had no standing other than to become a full-on, Jesuit style theological liberal, which just is not in my DNA to go there. So that was sort of the final straw. But what it really came down to is can I devote my life? Can this project be my life project? And the answer really had to, at the end of the day, um, be no. No, I couldn't do that. And I didn't leave, with drama. I still just to go back to the story of the parish, eventually we did get a pastor, and I was very friendly and cordial with my former past Eastern Catholic pastor. I would even say we were friends. So there wasn't any kind of personal clash. There wasn't any kind of drama or blow up. It was just at the end of the day, I decided I couldn't invest in this project anymore. So I don't believe that I've really sabotaged any relationships or anything like that. Not at all. But I am very clear that theologically, I do not believe that Eastern Catholicism is a coherent position. Maybe it was. Maybe it was in the 1400s when the first Uniate movements first started happening, and it wasn't necessarily clear from at least an Eastern point of view that things couldn't be worked out. Even at the Council of Florence, if you go back, it wasn't even clear then that the Latin Church had really solidified in its Trinitarian theology. But I think after Vatican I, there's no way to square that circle. It's very clear that the Roman Church has dogmatized a certain trajectory, and you can't get out of that. So I understand why these Unite movements happen in the first place. I don't necessarily even buy a lot of the Orthodox apologetics that they were de facto purely political machinations. I think politics are certainly involved in that, especially in Eastern Europe, maybe less so in the Middle East, but it still was part of the Middle Eastern situation. So, I do believe in some quarters there was good faith for why those Unionite endeavors happened. But I believe in the year 2020, with centuries of experience behind us, that really this is not a position that has a future, especially since the Roman Catholic Church, in the last few years, like I've said, there's now a full-on war between the hierarchy is really waging on its most faithful members. I just to me that really demolished everything. So. Um, Also in this mix was the whole episode, with Pope Francis, with the Pachamama, and I don't want to hear all the apologetics for the Pachamama. Like that's not my deal. That's not my issue. It was Traditionis Custodes that sealed the deal. That the papacy had made it clear that it trumps tradition, that it is the arbiter of what tradition is. Um, yeah, I just can't go along with that. So it was really the papacy's war against traditional Catholicism that I saw as basically the straw for me that broke the camel's back as well. That I couldn't, in good conscience, be involved in this ecclesial structure that could do something like that to its own faithful. It's just it's crazy, and that does very clearly affect the life of the Eastern Catholic Church. Um, Eastern Catholics sort of have a mythology that they're isolated from Rome, that they're protected, that at the end of the day they will always have their tradition, despite the fact that Rome makes it very clear that it does not. It can override any Eastern Catholic patriarch or bishop at any moment and change the tradition. Um, will they do that? Probably not, but it does affect Eastern Catholicism in a very pivotal way, and that is um, the really the open secret of Eastern Catholic parishes as is that at the end of the day they are largely refugee camps for disaffected Roman Catholics. I mean, that's just a reality. Um, People don't want to go to their own Roman Catholic liturgies because who would want to expose yourself to these things. Um, so invariably, these very traditional Catholics who don't want to go the Latin Mass route, they occupy Eastern Catholic churches, and that was an unsurmountable problem that I had witnessed for a decade, as long as I was there, that I don't have a solution for. Like, how do you incorporate people who like your liturgy but reject your spirituality, reject your theology, um, and are just there basically as refugees? I mean, Tawil made the famous, or it might have even been Zogby, I forget which one, that this whole perception of the Eastern Catholic churches as bridge churches in and of itself is highly problematic. Like, uh, you know, what do people do with bridges? Well, they walk over them or they live under them because they're homeless. And that's really was my experience. Is Eastern Catholicism was really a bridge for Roman Catholics to finally discover Orthodoxy, or Protestants to finally discover Orthodoxy, because they want to explore traditional Christianity. They find Roman Catholic apologetics, and then they try to get incorporated into a Roman Catholic parish, and they discover this is not the church that they've read themselves into. So they come to an Eastern Catholic church, and then they walk across it and they become Orthodox, or it's disaffected Latins that live underneath it because they are ecclesiastically homeless. And right before I left, that was right when a lot of major Roman Catholic apologists, um, it just it became known that they all, almost without exception, attend Eastern Catholic liturgies. Like, they're holding on to dear life, to really the leftovers of the Orthodox tradition, to shield themselves from the problems of the Roman Church. All the while, they're ferociously sort of arguing for Roman Catholic ecclesiology. I just found that so um, incomprehensible, but it also meant that the position that I was trying to maintain, a position of being fully Orthodox in this sort of Catholic structure, wasn't something that could even be maintained from within Catholic parishes. Like, how do I go to the same parish as someone like your online Catholic apologist? We're just miles apart theologically, and things like that, or challenges like that, kept popping up uh, through my whole time in Eastern Catholicism, and even at my former parish. Because at the end of the day, these people are Catholics first. So that whole strategy of trying to foster sort of our Orthodox patrimony, how are you going to do that with a congregation full of people who fundamentally reject vast swaths of that tradition, reject the spirituality, reject the theology? Um, I don't know. I don't know how to square that circle. Maybe you could do that as an Eastern Catholic cleric, where you can sort of set the ground of what's going to be fostered at your parish and what is not. But I wasn't a cleric. And frankly, if I was ordained as a priest, that's not even something I would even want to do. Like it just the monumentality of that task of like how do you get these people to, you know, switch over their theology or their ecclesiology to something that's orthodox and then expect them to stay in your parish. Like I don't um like I didn't even want that to be my problem anymore. Like so um so that's what happened. I genuinely became converted. I genuinely accepted the Orthodox teaching and accepted the fact that my own theological position was untenable. It had nothing really to do with drama or sort of the specifics of my own life situation, even though that did um, play into the urgency in which I felt I needed to make those decisions. So I hope this was helpful. If anyone wants to talk, you can certainly contact me privately. But that really is what happened. Um, Again, I am not making the claim, nor would I have made such a stupid claim that the Orthodox Church has like better clergy or less scandal and less drama. I think it's more coherent. Um, it the bad leadership doesn't fundamentally undermine our doctrine as it does in Eastern Catholicism, because it is doctrine that the Pope cannot defect from the faith, cannot give you bad liturgy, cannot um, um, demoralize the faithful. Uh, it this whole mythology of, well, he has to like supposedly make it really official that this is a doctrine binding all the faithful in order for him to really be a heretic. I mean, all of that's just really cope. And but that's not even my I will direct you to other apologists if you want to argue those points. Um, but basically, all I'm saying is you're going to have lots of similar problems in Orthodoxy. Uh, you're not going to have sort of the crazy liturgical chaos or the theological chaos, but you still have, human failings. But Orthodoxy doesn't present a theology that can't account for those human failings. So what I've experienced in Orthodoxy, again, a lot of the same problems, a lot of the same systemic issues, the same temptation towards Americanism and liberalism. But I fully expected that. Like, it's not that I'm shocked. I still believe I made the right decision, because at the end of the day, I do believe Orthodoxy has a future. Whereas Eastern Catholicism, in my opinion, really doesn't. At at the end of the day, that the chickens are going to come home to roost. Just because the Melkite Patriarch rejected Vatican I doesn't mean that that question goes away. Um, the theological issues still need to be squared, and the systemic problems of the fact that the Eastern Catholic bishops are appointed by the Bishop of Rome. They're subservient to Roman Catholic bishop conferences, even though they claim to be independent. Like, you still have to run into all of the same issues. And even if you can get full autonomy of Eastern Catholic churches, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself the question, is it valid to be in union with these people who are heretical in their doctrine and who have failed morally in their pastoral responsibilities? I don't think you can. So even if Eastern Catholics or sort of the Zogbyites got everything they wanted with full autonomy, you're still in union with people you don't believe. So those are my reasons.